These 7 lines are getting it right these days. But why? Cruising doesn't feel the same anymore. And if you've sailed recently, you know exactly what I mean. You're paying more, the ships feel more crowded, and sometimes you step off thinking, was that actually worth it? A lot of people believe cruising is going downhill. Honestly, I used to think so too. But after sailing again and digging through hundreds of real passenger reviews from the last 6 months, something unexpected showed up. Most cruise lines are getting criticized more than ever, but a very small group is doing the opposite. Passengers aren't just satisfied, they're coming back. And today, I'm breaking down 7 cruise lines that travelers say are actually getting it right now. Starting with one that proves you don't need bigger ships, louder entertainment, or non-stop hype to win loyalty. Holland America Line. This one surprised me, because while most cruise lines are racing to go bigger, louder, and busier, Holland America quietly went the other way. They slowed things down, and that decision is pulling people back. I kept seeing the same kind of review pop up. Passengers who hadn't sailed Holland America in years, sometimes 5, sometimes longer. They came back expecting the same old experience and didn't recognize it. Not because it became flashier, because it became calmer, sharper, more intentional. You feel it almost immediately on board. Fewer crowds, shorter lines, less of that low-grade stress that makes some cruises feel exhausting instead of relaxing. If you've cruised long enough, you know how rare that feels now. But the real difference runs deeper than comfort. Holland America figured out something many lines are losing. The rhythm of cruising? Days don't feel rushed. You're not being dragged from activity to activity. You can join in, or you can do absolutely nothing and still feel like the day worked. That balance shows up quickly at dinner. Food reviews are noticeably more consistent than before. Not one great night followed by disappointment. The main dining room gets mentioned more often and in a better way. Specialty venues like Pinnacle Grill and Tamarind keep coming up in positive reviews. From my perspective, this isn't accidental. Holland America now works directly with a culinary council to elevate food quality fleet-wide. That's not a cosmetic upgrade. That's a strategic one. Ship size matters too. Holland America's ships are smaller than many competitors in the same category, and that changes everything. Spaces breathe, moving around feels easier. The experience feels more personal instead of overwhelming. It's not about numbers on paper. It's about how the ship feels on day 3 when the novelty wears off. Itineraries help reinforce that identity. Alaska remains a standout, but passengers also consistently praise routes to Japan, South America, and Africa that feel immersive without being exhausting. And importantly, Holland America still offers a wide range of cabin prices, keeping value from drifting too far away from reality. Now, this line isn't for everyone. Entertainment is still divisive. Some younger passengers find the vibe too traditional. Live music gets praise, but there's still nostalgia for older classical venues, even though signs point to them returning. And yes, a few ships are starting to show their age. But when you step back, the strategy is crystal clear. Holland America isn't trying to impress everyone. They're serving cruisers who want calm, classic, well-run voyages with better food and a humane pace. And that consistency is exactly why seasoned cruisers are rating them higher again. And this sets up an interesting contrast, because the next cruise line on this list proves that doing things right doesn't always mean slowing down. Sometimes it means removing friction entirely. Viking Ocean Cruises. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you finished a cruise and thought, nothing went wrong at all? No chaos, no upsell pressure, no constant decision fatigue. Because for a very specific group of cruisers, that feeling is exactly why Viking keeps showing up near the top of every satisfaction ranking. What stood out to me while reading recent reviews wasn't excitement. It wasn't over-the-top praise. It was something quieter. Confidence. People book Viking already knowing what the experience will feel like. And then it delivers. Viking Ocean Cruises is sitting at an average score around 4.6 out of 5, one of the highest in the entire industry. And the reason isn't innovation or flash. It's consistency. Most people choose Viking for 3 very deliberate reasons. They don't want a loud ship, they don't want to be sold to after boarding, and they don't want to share their space with kids. Viking removes all of that up front. Adults only, calm, Scandinavian design, no casino, no photographers chasing you down the hallway, no constant feeling that you're one swipe away from another charge. And that alone eliminates a huge amount of friction. But what passengers talk about even more is how little thinking the cruise requires. Airport transfers are handled, pre- and post-cruise programs are built in. And at every port, there's at least one shore excursion already included. You're not standing there doing mental math. You're not asking yourself if skipping a tour means missing the point of the destination. You just go. Over and over, I saw the same word appear in reviews. Seamless. Everything flows. Everything happens when it's supposed to. Nothing feels rushed or stressful. For older travelers, and for cruisers who care more about destinations than onboard spectacle, that matters more than water slides or headline entertainment. Now, Viking isn't perfect. On longer itineraries, some passengers mentioned that menus can feel repetitive. Prices are high, and they keep climbing. And for American guests, the requirement to pay in full far in advance, sometimes nearly a year out, still frustrates people. But here's the key point. None of that is hurting trust. Viking isn't trying to be flexible for everyone. They're building a very specific experience for travelers who value calm, clarity, and predictability. They know exactly who they're serving, and they're not apologizing for it. And that focus is why Viking remains one of the most stable, best-rated cruise lines in the industry. Which brings us to something important. What's interesting is this. Right now, the real momentum in cruising isn't coming from the lines that never stumbled. It's coming from the ones that took the hit and rebuilt with intention. Celebrity Cruises. There was a stretch not too long ago when Celebrity felt stuck. Not bad, just less special. For a brand that used to feel like the clear leader in the premium space, that was a problem. Passengers started comparing them less favorably to competitors. The excitement cooled, the edge softened, and that shows up clearly when you read older reviews. What's changed recently is how consistent the tone feels now. Over and over, I saw the same message. Celebrity feels like itself again. But this wasn't a small tune-up. This was a reset. Celebrity made a very deliberate decision to lean hard into modern luxury. Cleaner design. Sharper identity. Less middle of the road. And everything about that shift points back to one thing. The Edge class ships, Edge, Apex, Beyond, Ascent, Excel. These ships didn't just refresh the fleet, they reset expectations. Passengers described them as elegant, contemporary, thoughtfully designed. Even features that sparked debate early on, like the infinite verandas, fade into the background once people experience how cohesive the ships feel. When you compare reviews side by side, the gap is obvious. Edge-class ships consistently score higher than Solstice or Millennium. And even with upgrades, the older ships still feel like they're chasing the present instead of defining it. To Celebrity's credit, they know this. Major refurbishments for those older ships are already underway. That tells me this isn't a lucky rebound. It's a planned one. Food is another area where momentum is building. The main dining room gets stronger feedback than it did a few years ago. Specialty venues stand out not just for novelty, but for execution. Le Petit Chef, Eden, and longtime favorites like Sushi on 5, Tuscan Grill, and Murano continue to show up in positive reviews for consistency, not just creativity. Service fits the premium promise again? Polished, friendly, predictable in the best way. At the higher end, the Retreat remains a major differentiator. Yes, it's expensive. No one pretends otherwise. But for passengers who want a ship within a ship experience, the private lounge, dedicated sun deck, Lumine dining, and suite-level service still deliver what they promise. Now, this isn't a perfect picture. Prices are climbing. The always included package creates confusion, especially now that it covers only basic drinks and basic Wi-Fi, unless you're in the retreat. That's an area where Celebrity could communicate more clearly. But direction matters more than perfection. Celebrity isn't trying to preserve an old image. They're intentionally reshaping it. Modern luxury. Design-forward ships, a clearer gap between premium and mass market. And based on what passengers are saying right now, that strategy is working. What makes this contrast even sharper is that not every line climbing right now is doing it through polish or prestige. Some are rising simply because they finally aligned price, promise, and reality. And Margaritaville at sea is the clearest example. Margaritaville at sea. I'll be upfront. A few years ago, if you asked me about Margaritaville at sea, I wouldn't have recommended it. The early reviews were rough. Not because everything was terrible, but because expectations were completely off. People boarded thinking they were getting a luxury cruise at a rock-bottom price. And when that fantasy collapsed, disappointment followed fast. What's changed isn't just the product. It's the understanding. Today, passengers know exactly what Margaritaville is. A short cruise, simple ships, relaxed, playful atmosphere, a vacation that doesn't pretend to be 5-star. And once expectations snapped into place, something interesting happened. The reviews started climbing, not because the ship suddenly became new, not because the cabins turned luxurious, but because the experience finally matched the promise. Food quality shows up again and again as better than expected for the price. Service gets described as friendly, upbeat, and surprisingly attentive. The onboard vibe feels fun without trying too hard. I kept noticing the same kind of comment. People boarded skeptical, especially after reading older reviews. Then they left, pleasantly surprised. Staff felt genuinely warm. Meals delivered solid value. The mood stayed light and easy instead of stressful. Now, Margaritaville still has limits. The ships aren't new. Cabins feel dated. Entertainment is basic compared to the big brands. But here's the difference. At this price point, passengers accept those trade-offs. They don't feel misled, and that's the key. Margaritaville stopped trying to be something it wasn't. They leaned into what they actually are. From cheap but disappointing, they moved into a much safer space. Affordable, fun, worth it. And that shift shows up clearly in the ratings, now sitting above 4 out of 5 and rivaling lines that charge far more. Which leads to an important realization. Doing things right doesn't always mean adding more. Sometimes it means stripping the experience down to exactly what the passenger came for. And after a line that's rising by embracing simplicity, it's time to look at a very different kind of refinement. One built around space, food, and quiet confidence. Oceania Cruises. There's a certain kind of cruise that doesn't need to announce itself. No flash, no hype, no need to convince you it's special. Oceania lives in that space. I've always had a soft spot for this brand. But I'll say this honestly. There was a period when Oceania felt less distinctive than it used to. Not worse, just less sharp. When you read recent reviews, though, something shifts. Oceania isn't reinventing itself, it's refocusing. And that change shows up most clearly in the ships. Vista and Allura keep coming up in a very specific way. Passengers describe them like boutique hotels at sea, roughly 1,200 guests. Elegant without being showy, quiet without feeling sleepy, those ships consistently score higher than the rest of the fleet. And that makes sense. When ships get smaller, details matter more. Space feels intentional, crowds disappear. The experience starts to feel personal again, but the real backbone of Oceania has always been food. For a while, the slogan, "the finest cuisine at sea," felt like a bold claim under pressure. Lately, the tone in reviews has changed. Not because every meal is perfect, but because quality feels consistent. Restaurants like Jacques, Red Ginger, Polo Grill, and Toscana show up repeatedly, not as one-off highlights. As steady performers, passengers talk about finishing a cruise without that familiar feeling of inconsistency, the sense that some nights shine while others miss. That reliability matters more than spectacle. Now, not all feedback is glowing. Some guests still feel the dining promise occasionally runs ahead of reality. Shore excursions and enrichment programs split opinion. Pricing structures and benefit changes have confused more than a few loyal guests. And there's quiet concern about how far Oceania can push scale without blurring its identity. Those concerns are real, but direction matters. Right now, the momentum is coming from smaller ships and a renewed emphasis on what Oceania has always done best. Space, calm, food-driven cruising. They're not chasing the mainstream. They're sharpening their lane. For travelers who want refinement without spectacle and dining without drama, Oceania is reminding people why it earned its reputation in the first place. And this reinforces a pattern we're seeing again and again. Cruise lines don't rise by copying each other. They rise by understanding exactly who's stepping on board. Which brings us to a brand that proves something else entirely. You don't need luxury. You don't need novelty. You just need to know your guests better than anyone else. Fred Olsen Cruises. Some cruise lines win by changing fast. Fred Olsen is winning by not changing at all. At least, not in the way most people expect. For a while, reviews around Fred Olsen felt mixed. Not because passengers hated the experience, but because the line seemed caught between worlds. Not modern enough for new cruisers. Not polished enough for some longtime guests. What changed recently isn't a flashy reinvention. It's focus. Fred Olsen stopped trying to stretch beyond its core audience. And once that happened, the reviews shifted. One of the most important moves was the fleet itself. Bolette and Borealis, formerly Holland America ships, now sit at the heart of the experience. They aren't new in the headline sense, but they feel solid, familiar, and comfortable. That matters to Fred Olsen's passengers. These ships replaced older vessels that had quietly become liabilities. And the difference shows up clearly in feedback. Less criticism, more warmth, more people saying the ships feel right again. Itineraries are another quiet strength. Fred Olsen doesn't box itself into one region. Northern Europe, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, South America, even long world voyages. But what loyal passengers mention most isn't the destination list. It's where the journey begins. Fred Olsen sails from multiple ports across the UK, not just Southampton. For guests who don't want complicated travel days or multiple flights, that convenience changes everything. There's also a feeling that keeps coming up in reviews. Familiarity. Many passengers describe Fred Olsen as feeling like coming home. The onboard culture is distinctly British. Service feels warm rather than polished. Formal gala nights still exist, not as nostalgia, but as tradition. For the people who choose Fred Olsen, those moments matter. Now, the limitations are obvious. Some interiors feel dated. Certain cabins are basic compared to premium lines. You won't find cutting-edge design or trend-driven entertainment, but those aren't deal breakers for this audience. Because Fred Olsen passengers aren't shopping for novelty. They're shopping for comfort, calm, and a sense of belonging. And that's where the strategy works. Fred Olsen isn't trying to become someone else. They're becoming more consistent at being themselves. And when a cruise line truly understands its loyal guests, it leads to a bigger question. What happens when a brand builds everything around one specific age group? And does it exceptionally well? That's exactly where this story ends. Saga Cruises. There's one lesson the cruise industry often forgets. When you serve the right passenger well enough, price stops being the biggest concern. Saga is built entirely around that idea. This line is exclusively for travelers over 50. No exceptions. And instead of treating that as a limitation, Saga designs the entire experience around it. That clarity shows up immediately in the reviews. Saga isn't cheap, But passengers consistently describe it as worth the money, because value, at this stage of life, isn't about how much you can do. It's about how little you have to worry about. Saga removes friction before the cruise even starts. Door-to-door transportation, travel insurance already included, no flights, no complex transfers. Every voyage begins and ends in the UK. For many older travelers, that alone changes how the trip feels. The vacation starts calm instead of stressful. Then there are the ships. Spirit of discovery and spirit of adventure reset expectations entirely. Modern. All balcony. Elegant without feeling clinical or dated. Nothing about them feels old in the negative sense. Everything is designed for comfort, easy movement, and quiet enjoyment. Onboard feedback centers around familiar themes. Food is reliable and well executed. Service is patient, warm, and attentive. Entertainment is thoughtfully paced. Engaging without being overwhelming. This isn't about spectacle. It's about ending the day feeling relaxed, not drained. Of course, Saga has limits. Sailing only from the UK reduces itinerary variety. Global reach is narrower than larger brands. But for Saga's passengers, that's rarely a deal breaker. Because Saga isn't trying to attract everyone. They're building an experience for one very specific group, and they're doing it thoroughly. When you step back and look at these 7 cruise lines, a pattern becomes clear. The ones moving upward aren't doing more. They're doing things right. Right for their passengers, right for the expectations they set, right for the identity they chose not to abandon. In an industry obsessed with change, the hardest decision isn't knowing what to update. It's knowing what to protect. And if these are the cruise line's passengers say are getting it right, then the next conversation matters just as much. Because not every line is on this path. In the next video, I'll break down the cruise lines travelers say are quietly losing their way, and why some of the names on that list might surprise you. I'll see you there.